Hi, John Reed here. This video is about an obscure, relatively unknown short-range piston airliner, the Martin 404. This type was first flown by TWA and Eastern Airlines in the 1950s with a capacity of 40 passengers and a maximum gross weight of approximately 44,500 pounds. With only 103 examples built from 1951 to 1953, it was the successor to Martin's unsuccessful 202 airliner, which was produced in much fewer numbers. I think about 46 or 47 of those built. The highlight of this program is full audio video of the first arrival from South Florida of Save-A-Connie's Martin 404 at their home base, Kansas City Downtown Airport, at 3 p.m. on December 11th, 1990. I've not seen any other published footage of this event. As some or most of you know, Save-A-Connie is now the Airline History Museum in Kansas City. This is an extremely rare injected foam model of the Martin 404 in 1/72nd scale that I built in 1978. This kit was on the market for only a few months. A good, accurate scale model of the aircraft was never produced, and I had to extensively modify the flight deck windscreen area and the engine cowlings to make it more accurate. The nacelles and cowlings had no detail and were incorrectly shaped as an ellipse. I tore it all out and rebuilt it with the correct rounder profile, as you can see here, especially the cowling. And I know it's hard to see, but I had to tear out and modify the carburetor air scoop on top here, as well as add oil coolers over here on the right side of each engine nacelle, which were totally lacking. All this took more time than actually building, painting, and decowaling the plane. And I'm sorry to say, for those who like static model airplanes and the Martin 404, good luck with ever finding a decent or even a very bad static model of this aircraft. I'd like to mention that, this video aside, there are a few other pretty good modern-day operational clips of restored flying Martin 404s that have appeared on YouTube and elsewhere, but not many. Along those lines, I'm aware of only a handful of other flyable Martin 404 restorations, in addition to Save-A-Connie's featured here, that were flown to air shows. None flew the circuit for more than a few short years in the 1990s. The 404's main competitors consisted mainly of the Convair 240, 340, and 440 twins. These were produced in vastly greater numbers than the Martins and therefore were more recognized by the general public. Both the Martins and the Convairs were powered by similar versions of the air-cooled 18-cylinder CA or CB series Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine, generally developing 2,400 to 2,500 horsepower each on takeoff. This engine was actually designed in the late 1930s as a fighter engine. Earlier military versions of this engine powered several of the great World War II fighters, such as the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the Vought F-4U Corsair series, and the later Grumman Bearcat and Tigercat fighters. Save-A-Connie's Martin 404, registered November 145 Sierra, was their second vintage aircraft acquisition, complementing their massive Super Constellation Star of America, which was acquired 4.5 years earlier and restored, and had since begun flying the airshow circuit. It was wisely decided that Save-A-Connie should be something beyond a single aircraft museum, and this Martin 404 acquisition started this process. As mentioned, TWA and Eastern Airlines were the initial operators of the 404 during the decade of the 50s and early 60s, ordering 40 and 60 units respectively, making up most of the 103 produced from 1951 to 53. They then went to second-tier operators such as Ozark, Piedmont, Mohawk, and Southern during the 1960s and into the 1970s, and then to even smaller operators, primarily in Florida, such as Provincetown, Boston, Marco Island Airways, and Systems International, and were flown by these well into the late 1980s. November 145 Sierra was an Eastern aircraft that was passed on to Piedmont, Southern Airways, and later to others, before winding up with Systems International out of Florida, just before being acquired by Save-A-Connie. The Eastern Martin 404s featured pointy noses containing a new innovation, weather radar. TWA planes, on the other hand, had blunt, rounded noses like this, as they were ordered without radar, as my scale model correctly depicts. Acquiring 145 Sierra was the result of painstaking negotiations and prep work on the part of several proactive Save-A-Connie members. In contrast with the Super Connie, which made its operational living as an H-model freighter, the 404 was acquired fully intact with a complete passenger interior, and the overall aircraft was in very good shape. However, it still needed a lot of maintenance and airworthiness directive work, cleaning, painting, and paperwork before certification to fly members to air shows. While I had a very small part in the funding as well as the physical restoration of Super Constellation Star of America, I only provided financial support for the 404, along with that of many other members, before my Save-A-Connie membership lapsed sometime during 1992, as I focused on propliner cargo operations out of Miami. My earliest encounters with the Martin 404 started in 1970 in St. Louis with operator Interstate Air Motive, a charter company which flew for athletic teams, travel clubs, and the like. These planes were November 465 Mike, November 471 Mike, and November 475 Mike. All three of these aircraft started life with Eastern Airlines and wound up with Ozark Airlines. In the mid-70s, these three aircraft were all passed on to another St. Louis operator, Petroleum Air Transport, and then to DHL in 1978. They were then scrapped by DHL in Hawaii in 1983. One unfortunate event I've always remembered since the day it happened was the senseless crash of a chartered Golden Eagle Aviation Martin 404 in a box canyon in Colorado near the Continental Divide on October 2nd, 1970,
costing the lives of nearly half the Wichita State football team. This was a blatant act of stupidity on the part of one crew member. 2 Martin 404s were chartered by Wichita State for the trip from Denver to a game in Ogden, Utah. The non-type-rated owner of the pilot leasing company being employed appointed himself to fly the left seat of the ill-fated 404. In a complete lapse of judgment, he forced upon everyone on board a scenic detour up the 70-mile-long climbing mountain valley toward Loveland Pass. This was against the advice of the 27-year-old type-rated co-pilot who was legally serving as pilot in command and was the leasing company's employee. The terrain rose faster than the plane could climb at this high-density altitude. To add insult to injury, the self-appointed pilot owner survived the crash, but the poor young pilot employee was killed on impact. Most of the 40 passengers and crew survived the impact, only to be consumed by a raging post-impact fire. There were 32 fatalities and 8 injured out of 40 persons on board. The ill-fated plane, November 464 Mike, also happened to be of the Eastern to Ozark Airlines lineage. In the final analysis, another key factor in the crash was the fact that the plane took off 5,000 pounds overweight, also inexcusable in any situation, but especially in a mountainous, high-density altitude environment. Despite earlier reports, neither the aircraft nor the engines had any maintenance deficiencies, and the aircraft was otherwise in generally good condition. Today, there's a monument near the crash site, and hikers can still visit and pay their respects at the residual wreckage. At this point, I don't have publishing access to any photos of the wreck site, either past or present, but many such photos can be found online. Well, enough of my background perspectives. Let's go to Kansas City Downtown Airport on December 11th, 1990, and witness the historical arrival.
They need special steps for this too?
Looking good, Chris. You're looking good. Feeling good. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we saw that. I didn't know who was out there. Dad, boy, get the shadow off your face.
Hey, where's the bar at? I don't think I bar. Fully stopped. Right here.
This is the last I saw of 145 Sierra as finished in its quasi-TWA colors in mid-1992. She was christened Skyliner Kansas City and was considered by Save-A-Connie as ideal for small rural air shows at smaller airports where the Super Constellation could not land. As it turns out, I think Skyliner Kansas City saw very few air show trips, if any at all.
Compared to the flagship Super Constellation, Skyliner Kansas City seemed to become a static display very early on. My guess is that the extremely high cost of the Super Constellation's aggressive airshow schedule ultimately left few resources for operating the 404, as well as possible lack of interest in this aircraft type by airshow sponsors and or attendees. But again, these are only my guesses. I visited another 404 flying restoration at Oshkosh in 1993, which I noticed was not attracting many airshow attendees. To this day, Skyliner Kansas City remains a very fine static exhibit with the Airline History Museum.
There were only a handful of other Martin 404 resurrections that arrived concurrently with or just after Save-A-Connie's 404 project. Mid-Atlantic Air Museum flew this Eastern Livery 404 on the airshow circuit for a few short years in the early to mid-1990s. This footage and accompanying photos were shot at Oshkosh in July 1993, but I didn't see it fly at the air shows. I think this aircraft, too, has long since become a static display due to general lack of interest in the type.
Another 404 restoration was faithfully executed by experienced aviation entrepreneur and pilot Jeff Weitzel. That plane, November 636 X-Ray, flew the airshow circuit only a few years in the mid to late 1990s and possibly early 2000s. It flew in Pacific Airlines colors, I think mainly up and down the West Coast. This plane had actually operated out of St. Louis as a corporate aircraft during the late 1970s and early 1980s, and had ironically been operated by the Weitzel family years before that. I regularly saw it parked at St. Louis Lambert International, but never got photos. Again, several such photos and articles may be found online on this aircraft. While these few Martin 404s did have a very brief second wind during the 1990s as outlined, it's highly plausible that none are flying now, and this fine but largely ignored machine will likely never grace the skies again.